Hello, family members. Hope you're having a nice day today. I want to talk to you today about something that you can really put in two different terms. One is innocence, and the other is ignorance. So let's talk about that. Before I get started, I would like to say I really appreciate all the comments, subscribes that I've gotten over the last week. It's not, I'm a small YouTuber, it's not much, but I do really appreciate anyone who engages on any level, even just watching. So thank you so much. And always feel free to tell me what you think. Thank you. Anyway, so ignorance, innocence, let's talk about that. I grew up knowing that I was not gay. I just knew that for sure. And I only knew of essentially three options: being gay, or being straight, or being bisexual. And I knew I wasn't any of those things. I knew for certain I didn't want to be in a relationship with a woman. I was like, I don't even know what I would do with a woman. like, the idea of intimacy with a woman seemed like something that I wouldn't be able to accomplish, I guess. And so I just well, if you're not gay and you're not bi, then I guess you're straight. And so I just assumed I was straight. And I went through my life feeling all of the things that I would later realize were things that were indications that I wasn't straight. But I had no words for them, and I didn't know there were any other options. And so I just tried to be straight. I really did. I really, really did. I dated guys in high school, a couple of times, not very long, not really more than a month or two. It just, just didn't feel right. And I'd get in a relationship. A little bit, you'd enjoy that sort of new relationship energy. And it was really nice to have someone to do stuff with. It's just nice to have someone to hang out with that was, keen to hang out with you. But it really, more than just being special friends, I didn't really want that. And you go to college. I went to college, and you do what you do when you're in college. You experiment with who you think you might be or what you want to be. I'm a little bashful about it, but I'll admit it. I slept with a few guys when I was in college. None of them was someone I was dating, except for the first one. And that relationship was a long distance relationship, which is why I think it lasted as long as it did. But it just kind of fizzled out too. It never felt right to date guys. And guys were the only people that I ever tried to date. Because, again, I knew for certain I couldn't really imagine being in a relationship with a woman, because I don't enjoy receiving manual pleasure. I'm trying to be, circumspect to avoid any sort of censorship on this. But it just seemed like that you can't be in a relationship with a woman if that's not on the table. Which is kind of weird logic, honestly. Now I don't know that I would feel that way, but at the time, my understanding of woman-woman relationships was rather shallow, to say the least. And so it was just like, well, I can't be with them because I can't let them do what they would want to do naturally in a relationship. That sounds off-putting to me. It's very strange, honestly, when I look back on it. But at any rate, so by the time that I'm in my like late 20s, I've come across the term asexual, another option other than uh, straight, gay, or bi. Oh, okay. Well, what did that fit me? No, it didn't, because I do find people attractive. Like, at some point, I realized it wasn't just men, it was just basically anyone. It didn't really matter what their gender was. So, how could you be asexual but actually feel sexual attraction? You can't. That's actually the one thing that you can't do. You can do a lot of things if you're asexual, but you can't have sexual attraction. That's how it works. So it's like, oh, okay, well, it's not that. And I just was living my life. I was doing the best I could. And I had no vocabulary for what I was or who I was or if there were any other people in the world like me. I was just doing the best I could. And I fell into what I would later realize, once I did have more vocabulary, a queer platonic relationship. Now, if you don't know what a queer platonic relationship is, that is a type of relationship that there's not a really good definition for it. Our society hasn't really come to terms with the idea that it's a thing. And so the vocabulary to describe it is somewhat limited. But essentially, it's someone that you have a relationship with that isn't friendship. It isn't romantic. It's a deep, close, personal bond that doesn't involve romance. And it's not just more than friends or not, it's because friendship is also a very important type of relationship. People don't understand how important their friendship relationships are a lot of times. Take it for granted. And the truth is that, your friendship relationships are a huge part of your emotional and well-being. Not everybody needs as much friendship energy as others, but some people need a lot of it. And sometimes it's a lot of different people. Sometimes it's like one close friend. Sometimes it's a small group. But those friendship relationships are very, very important. And I don't want to in any way, shape, or form devalue them by putting it on some sort of hierarchy. Like there's QPRs, queer platonic relationships, are somehow more than that. It's just it's a special kind of relationship that isn't romantic and that is different than friendship. It's like a soul bond. My current queer platonic partners, I have two of them, who are both polyamorous. They're essential to me. Our relationships don't function like friendships quite. They're closer to romantic relationships, but of course that's not really accurate either. It's hard to describe. And so, here I was not having this vocabulary, but I had fallen into that type of relationship. I had someone who was my partner, not romantic, but my partner, who was sort of my world in a way, and vice versa. And when her marriage started falling apart, because she was polyamorous, and when her marriage started falling apart and her life started getting complicated, to say the least, I didn't have the vocabulary really to explain to her why I needed her to hold more space for me. And I didn't feel like I had the right to ask for it, almost. And I didn't have the words to explain why it hurt so much and why it was so devastating. And it was so bad that I eventually moved away. I got as far away as I could be and still be in the same state, essentially. And I didn't talk to her for years and years. I was so heartbroken from the whole experience that I didn't talk to her for years and years. And it literally took several years later, her reaching out to mutual friends and my mom and my cousin, because she was so much a part of my life. She was no less a part of my life than she would have been if she was a romantic partner. She was my partner in every sense. Like, we did everything together, went everywhere together. She knew all of my family. I knew all of her family. I knew all of her in-laws. Like, we were incredibly close in ways it's just hard for me to fully describe. We had a real true relationship, a real true partnership. And yet I didn't have the vocabulary to explain that breakup and how much it hurt. And because of that, it took me a long time to give her another chance. It was the first real breakup I had ever had in my entire life. And I didn't understand that until years and years and years later. Like, maybe even a decade later. And I don't think I handled it very well in retrospect. I think that now that I can look back on it with a little more clarity, I realize that part of the reason I handled it so poorly, it didn't need to happen. We didn't want either one of us, our relationship, to end. But I didn't know how to tell her that she wasn't meeting my needs and give her the chance to actually do that. And so maybe it's possible that, if I had some understanding of what our relationship was, even just knowing that it was a real valid relationship, if there was a word for the kind of relationship that we had, and that I was allowed to value it as a true partnership. But I didn't have that. And I went the next few years, the next decade of my life, almost as a transient person. I moved to Huntington and then spent, like 3 years there. And then I ended up moving 5 times in 5 years and didn't finally settle down until I moved into this house and kind of built a new life for myself for a few years until I got cancer, and then everything got turned upside down, right? Anyway, I have to fiddle with this for a second. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. My phone's dying. I didn't realize. Okay. Anyway, so let's kind of talk about how things changed. When I was 35, I found the term aromantic. And it took me a few months to fully accept that was who I was. That there was a word for who I was. And I wasn't alone. And I got a community, and it was great. I don't feel romantic attraction. The reason why I didn't want to have romantic relationships with women was that I didn't want to have romantic relationships with anyone. And I was never told that that was an option. So I kept trying to force myself to want to have relationships with men. And it was hard for me, honestly, to come out publicly as aromantic, because I knew that my mom still held out hope for me to, fall in love and get married and all the stuff. And never had a relationship more than a few months long when I was 35, and she was still hoping for that. Because that's what she was told to hope. That's what people are told is how you're supposed to be a happy adult, is you have a romantic relationship. Like, there is something in our society that you are not a fully formed adult without that. And me being someone who's never ever been married, not like single because I'm divorced, but never been married, I get looked down on in this society. I get infantilized in this society. And even though it was true already before I learned the term or applied it to myself, there was something about verbalizing it, about admitting that it was real. I come from a very waspy background. It is sort of the wasp way to pretend like problems don't exist and just hope they go away, okay? So I think there was a little bit of a temptation to do that, but it was so much overridden by the happiness, the absolute delight of finally finding out that there are other people like me in the world, and that there's a word for people like me, and that I don't have to pretend or try to make myself to be straight, okay? So finding aromantic was an amazing thing. And once you join the aromantic community, you're going to eventually run into the term QPR, queer platonic relationship. And once I heard other aromantic people talk about what QPRs were and what theirs were like, I realized that's what my relationship had been. And after we reconnected, my partner and I said, because we didn't reconnect as partners, I was like, okay, we can be friends again, tentatively. And it took a few years of us being, a little bit more than acquaintances to work up to friendship. And then once we started being kind of close friends again, I was like, I think that our relationship that we had, back in our late 20s was a QPR. and discussed it with her, and she agreed. She's like, yeah, that's what our relationship was. Neither of us knew it, neither of us knew that term, but once we knew the term and we thought about it, we're like, yeah, that describes our relationship really well. And it was at that point that I started being able to come to terms with how difficult that breakup was. And until I was able to have that discussion with her, I don't think that I could have ever become close with her again, really, really close with her again, because I needed to be able to understand why everything felt so intense and horrible when we broke up. Because it was just a real breakup of a real relationship, of a real partnership. And something that was not friendship. It was something different, you know? And shortly after joining the aromantic community, finding my people, and one thing about aromantic spaces is there's a lot of overlap with asexual spaces. A lot of them are the same place. So a lot of people who are asexual are also aromantic. Not all of them have that sort of split attraction thing like I do. But it wasn't until I started, spending time in spaces with a lot of asexuals that I came across the term aegosexual. And finally, at like, I think 37 or something, finally understood my sexuality. And that one is the one that really was the real eureka moment. It wasn't a, I fight this. It's as soon as I knew it existed, I'm like, holy shit, there's a word for it. There are other people like me out there in the world. I cannot believe this. This is amazing. Because I literally did not have words for my sexuality. I knew I wasn't asexual, but that I didn't really operate the way that like any other sexuality that I ever heard of did. And the thing about being aegosexual is that you need some sort of separation between you and the object of your attraction. And so that in a very practical sense means that for me, I am not able to come to any sort of completion during physical intimacy with other people. I just can't. I don't work that way. And it's a lot easier for a male partner to feel like they've had a complete intimate encounter with you without you finding release than it is with a female partner. And that was what I was picking up on. A female partner would have noticed that I wasn't able to enjoy the act the way that she was. A male partner's a lot less likely to notice that. And I know that says a lot about our society and, education about intimacy that we receive and da 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 da. But that's just how my life worked. It was easier to pretend to have some sort of intimate relationship with men than it would have been with a woman. And I find it interesting, since I've realized I'm aegosexual and aromantic, I've had 3 partners, one of whom was AMAB, and 2 of whom were AFAB. And the one that was AMAB was genderqueer. Literally not been involved with a man since I understood that I could have relationships with people without having to have this intimacy show and pony dance or whatever it is. Uh, this is a difficult subject for me to talk about. It's related to the aegosexuality. It makes it difficult to be very frank when talking about these things because I don't feel comfortable talking about them as applied to myself. So I apologize if that was a little bit unclear. That's about as good as I can do on that topic. But it's so funny to me because you can deny children education about queer topics, but you can't stop queer children from being queer. And my life is an exact illustration of that fact. You know, I was denied access to the information that there was something other than gay, straight, and bi when I was a kid. Even though that information was out there, people have used the term asexual since like the 60s or 70s, I think. Like, I should have known that was an option. And I think I would have been happy to assume I was asexual when I was really young. And I might not have put myself into some situations that were a little bit sketchy with men in college and probably even high school if I had the idea that asexuality was given to me, if I had been given that information when I was younger. It really makes me mad that, you know, people didn't talk about being aromantic until fairly recently. Because people have been aromantic forever. I mean, nuns, a lot of them aromantic. I had an aunt who went to her grave never having been married. I had I had an older cousin who, to this day, never been married. Actually, a couple of them, male and female. Now, I have examples, there are historical examples of people who pledge not to be in relationships. And all of these, like, alloromantic, you know, people who do feel romantic attraction, the opposite of aromantics. All these alloromantic people out here think of that as like some sort of like sacrifice, like Artemis. They're like, oh, she gave up so much. I'm like, well, maybe she never wanted any of that, you know? Like, aro ace people existed all throughout history. They're documented. People who didn't want to have sex and relationships. People who didn't want to have relationships are out there. You know, like, we have existed. It's just we're misunderstood when we are documented. We're documented through this, like, very heteronormative lens that tries to paint us as people who are celibate instead of people who didn't want to have those types of relationships. Like, it is not a sacrifice for me to give up okra because I don't like okra, you know? It's not a sacrifice for me to give up raw tomatoes because I don't like raw tomatoes, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very different thing to abstain from something because you don't want it that versus that you feel like you should give it up for some other reason as a sacrificial reason. Well, family members, I think I've waffled on about this long enough already. I think you get the point. But I did want to take a moment to explain that you can keep kids ignorant and say that you're just trying to keep them innocent. You can do that. But you can't change who they are, fundamentally. And that's my deepest point. All right, I will let you go. Take care, and I will see you whenever it is I see you again. Bye.